Coogs house. The Houston Cougars are up to 10 commitments in the class of 2026, which begs the question, is Keisean Henderson the best recruiter on staff?
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Coogs. You want to join the conversation, but you don't know what to say. Tell us in the comments down below. Look, I saw this on a person's tip jar. They had two jars, one for one, one for the other. Are you a Del Taco person or a Taco Bell person? I guess you can also throw in third category if you're choosing. This is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, but more on that fun later. I want to talk about Houston Cougar football recruiting and if there's been a real sea change as we're getting more commitments every day, it feels like. I want to talk in the second segment about what the whole Big 12 is looking at right now, with Houston kind of leading the way. The Cougars, I guess, times two, you could argue, leading the way in how Big 12 recruiting is going. Third segment, thought experiment, flipping the script a little bit, looking at the Houston Cougar basketball schedule. But let's get into it. So Kaleb Walker commits to the University of Houston. He is a 6'3", 250-pound, strong power lifter type guy, defensive lineman from Lindale, Texas. Really impressive video out of him. Again, I bring that powerlifting background to really being a forklift kind of guy, moves bodies on the inside. I imagine he's probably a 3 technique at 250. He might be pretty close to being able to play early in his career. And in terms of him specifically in the defensive line, adds another big athletic body to a strong defensive line class for Giles, defensive line coach. Between this year and last year's group, you're really seeing a revamping of that group from the ground up with youth. If add the transfer guys, the Stillmans and Carlos Allens or whatever, in the transfer to kind of have the immediate future, but they're looking forward at things. They did a pretty good job. It looks like the last two classes, last one and this one, and putting those things together. But Kaleb Walker committing makes Houston have 10 commitments in the class of 2026, headlined obviously by quarterback Keisean Henderson, the 5-star, all everything, top player in the state, got robbed at Elite 11. You've heard the story by now. Keisean is a Coug, shut down his recruitment. He is all Cougs all the way. And Keisha's excitement over this on social media, over Kaleb's commitment, got my mind spinning a little bit. I started looking at some of these things, and I wonder if, as the charismatic, humble, hardworking representation of the program that Keisean is he really becoming the best recruiter on staff in many ways? And then I also want to talk for a second about if that's even a good or bad or any kind of a thing, right? So again, 10 commits. Of those 10, 5 of them were on Keisean Henderson's OV, or his official visit, after he shut down his recruitment. Meaning he had told the world it's just Houston. 5 of the 10 commitments were on his recruit trip the following weekend. Admittedly, 3 of them, Aaron Walford, Troy Pless, and Jeremiah Bushnell, were all 3 already committed. That week it was more about them showing up and having a good time. Xavier Flemings actually also was already committed. Bryson Castile has since committed. So 4 of those 5 had committed before that. I will say from that same weekend, Tucker Ashford has Houston in his top 4, the defensive lineman from Fort Worth. He commits, I believe it's early July. Javen Holmes, he is a safety from Madison Prep. He has, since that visit, reopened his recruitment and has Houston in his top 3. Jaden Warren has Houston in his top 3. He commits on the 13th of July. That's 13 or 713 for the folks that know area codes. Paris Melvin also has Houston in the top of his favorite schools or what have you. I forget what number he whittled it down to, but Houston's in that group, and he'll be committing soon in July, we imagine, with his visits wrapping up over the course of the next 10 days or so. And so with that looking at, you could very quickly get to more like, 9 out of 14 commitments being guys that were directly touched in their recruitment by Keisean Henderson as far as being impacted on an official visit or what have you. Some of these guys being some of the top guys too. Presently speaking, different sites have different things. J.D. Warren and Paris Melvin would kind of both be, if they were to commit to Houston, the top guy after Keisean. With that being said, I think right now it's really kind of a little bit wider net because of how different sites and different recruiting outlets do different things in terms of numerical ranking. I will say I really, really like Bushnell, big receiver, always a good thing for quarterback to have. I frankly really like Kaleb Walker. I love a powerlifting, big, strong defensive lineman as well. I think it's interesting that okay, pulling Keisean's name out of it, 5 of the 9 commitments to the University of Houston were on that visit with Keisean, selling the program to the other guys, and frankly enjoying and kind of building that camaraderie amongst themselves. I think it's worth noting that you want that in a quarterback. You want a guy that your program can rally around. We saw what this program did with Case Keenum, Greg Ward. It's not a crazy concept to have the face and heart of your program be the quarterback that is like the front porch of your program, the thing that people see from the outside in. I also think that I land where this is a good thing. This is not to like indict any aspect of Houston's recruiting outside of Keisean, right? Houston identified Keisean Henderson as a quarterback. That they did that early on. That ended up proving between the Michael Bishop connection and the Fritz of it all, and all of those things like that ended up being really, really important. It also, though, I think is important because you're handing this over to the kids. The kids are going to be like themselves recruiting one another in a way that the staff just isn't going to do. I talked about it before, the transfer portal, but kids talk all the time. There's no constraint on kid to kid communication like there is on coach to kid communication in the recruiting process. A lot of pressure to stay in Texas, in Houston, in the Bayou, from all different angles. And like we see Keisean posting on social media, the guys that maybe weren't on this, Kaleb Walker included, but David Gross and whatever, trying to build this class up. I think when we look back at what is undoubtedly going to finish, because this class is far from finished, but it will finish probably over the course of the summer and into, hopefully get a couple of late ads in the fall as well. I think you're looking at what's going to be a historic class for Houston, headlined by Keisean Henderson, and also in large part because of Keisean Henderson. When Kaleb Walker made it 10 official commitments, I was like, man, of those 10 they've got presently, that's a lot of guys that know Key pretty well. And I was right? I also think that when you look at like where this class could be in like 3 weeks, in like 4 weeks, you're going to see his fingerprint on even more of these things. And not to diminish talking about Kaleb Walker, because I do think he'll be an impactful defensive line recruit. I just think it's interesting to see how everyone Keisean tweets at, every person that Keisean comes into contact with becomes a better person potentially Houston Cougar for it, right? And I think that's really important quality in a quarterback that isn't necessarily quantifiable, but people want to come play with Keisean, and I think that's important. I want to talk more about what the importance of recruiting in the Big 12 looks like, including those other Cougars, the BYU Cougars, in just 1 second. But first, before we get too far, today's show is brought to you by everybody's over at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because summer sports are in full swing. Hit it, swing like baseball bats, golf clubs, tennis rackets, swinging that leg in soccer, all kinds of sports happening right now in the summertime. And FanDuel is the best way to make every game and match more exciting. If you're already following the action, why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned down on the beach or whatever they're doing that's not not winning. And listen, I like same game parlays, like having multiple layers and watching and keeping track of a bunch of things. It makes it all exciting and interesting. And I like winning. I also really like things like quick payouts and all of that that come with winning on FanDuel specifically. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Park Rangers locked on Coogs here. Go look at Houston and BYU, two sets of Cougars as new faces in the Big 12. So I should preface this that at the time of recording, Houston is the lone team in the Big 12 with a five-star commitment in the class of 2026. The lone team. Shortly thereafter, it's, I guess, supposed to assume that everyone is assuming that BYU is going to land their own five-star quarterback in Ryder Lyons class 2026. Now, Ryder Lyons is of the LDS faith. BYU, match made in heaven. His father played there. The idea of mission work is important to Ryder Lyons. Bigger than football to him. Jake Hatch did a great job covering over at Locked On Cougars. So go check that out with BYU side of things. But I think it's interesting for Houston and BYU, the two schools that will, by the end of Tuesday, presumably, be the only two schools in Big 12 with a five-star quarterback in class 2026. I think it's important for both schools who are pulling in five-star quarterbacks for reasons bigger than just playing ball. Keisean was put on for Houston, right? Alliance was put on for that faith, right? I think that it's also interesting that both schools have mascot Cougars and both schools are new to the Big 12. They've only been here a hot second. Neither school's even collected a full revenue share from the conference, and they're already leading the way with this recruiting thing. Now, listen, I understand that Houston, in terms of like recruit rankings right now, is somewhere in the middle of the pack in the conference, depending on what site and outlet you're looking at. But that's largely because they just got their 10th commitment, and some schools have 14 and 15 and what have you. As Houston's class finish just fills out, you'll add more recruits in that will bolster it, right? That's part of the math here with those numbers. But in terms of average recruit score, average numerical value per recruit, or every site has a different word for it. Houston is doing very well. BYU is doing very well. Somewhat interestingly enough, Arizona State is also doing very well. These new schools to the Big 12 have come in and kind of taken advantage of the Power 4 resources that the Big 12 offers. I don't know that it's a good or a bad thing, but I do think it's interesting that Houston is coming in and taking advantage in a way, and we haven't even seen them actually use their full capacity up because they haven't had every bit of the resources that the other schools have. They haven't had the full Big 12 share. They've had to like quickly do a coaching search and rebuild and all of that since joining the Big 12, right? First Big 12 season wasn't Dana Holgorsen season. Second to Big 12 season wasn't Willie Fritz season. That's some turmoil in your program that like even BYU and Sataki have not had to deal with, right? And so as you look at this, Houston, I think it's easy to argue is really ahead of schedule. BYU as well. Both sets of Cougars are looking to kind of use the Big 12 in a way to kind of accelerate the growth of their program into modern football and into the top of modern football. Last week, I talked with Jake and Richie and Spencer. We did a little bit of a roundtable about Big 12 recruiting, and Spencer was like, "What you guys are going to catch Texas Tech?" And I frankly think Houston will. And at the time, Jake thought that BYU would, and everyone thought their school would. But I think that one interesting thing about all of it is no one's asking if Kansas State's going to catch Texas Tech. No one's asking if Baylor's going to catch Texas Tech. And it's mostly catch Texas Tech because of the money they're spending on transfers, really. It's not even necessarily 2026 recruiting. frankly, even when you look at like recruit rankings outside of those three, Houston, BYU, and Arizona State, what is interesting is that the next couple of schools in the running, and so, at some points, have actually been atop of the running, are Kansas and Texas Tech. A couple teams that program feel relatively new to this as well. Tech has had moments in the sun. I think Kansas has been good once or twice. I don't mean to say that's nothing, but I do think that it's, again, kind of the shifting and changing of the guard. Colorado has had their successes, even if their 2026 class only has two commits in it so far. Their 2023, 2024, the post Dion time there has obviously, I guess, post his signing there, has obviously been successful in terms of bringing in talent. What they've done with that talent, obviously, is the criticism we talk about in Big 12 squads when Houston plays them to open up Big 12 play next year and all of that, right? But I do think that having Houston and BYU lead this path also validates bringing these new schools in the conference. You and I both remember when it looked like the Big 12 was on its last lifeline. There were people at Houston like, do we want to join that conference after having been turned away from it, 25, 30 years ago, and wanting to be a part of it for so much of that time? Once Texas and Oklahoma, following suit with A&M and Missouri, left to go to the SEC, obviously with about a decade in between there or whatever, people assumed like, well, the Big 12 is out to dry, and then they bring in these, you know, group of five or independent programs in Houston and BYU and Cincinnati and UCF, and they're like, well, you're adding these group of five programs, like, isn't even going to do anything. What you're seeing now is what they did was bring in programs that land the top end recruits. And I think that that's got to feel extremely validating for the Houston brass that fought to get into this conference, and also extremely validating for Fritz and moving into the Power Four and taking this job with all that. I'm excited to see what comes of it. We're going to obviously keep following Houston Cougar recruiting each day as more unfolds. I do think Houston's set up to have a really good first half of July with commitments. I will say, without saying names of sources and stuff like that, people inside feel very confident in several of these guys. So many so that even if several of our confidence pieces are wrong, as long as just a couple are right, they'll be okay. It's a really strong class as far as what they've been able to do. And frankly, I don't think it's going to be done in mid-July. I think it's just going to be really well set up in mid-July. So we'll see how things go with that. But before we get out of here, third segment, I want to have my third segment thought experiment and talk about flipping the script with Houston basketball schedule. But first, Park Rangers locked on Coogs here. And I brought this up earlier this month. I wanted to last week. But looking at Houston's basketball schedule with the Big 12 matrix coming out, with the Big 12 matrix, we got to see who Houston will play and where in terms of basketball season next year. And if you're new to the show, third segment thought experiment is me investigating, diving deep into things that may feel tangential, outside the box, or whatever, kind of revisiting old things. If you've got a take you want to submit to that, you can send the video into LOCoogspod or just an email to locoogspod@gmail.com. But in looking at this matrix, I really do maintain that Houston just got flat screwed because they have these home and homes with Tech, Baylor, Cincinnati. Sure. Texas Tech and Baylor, in-state rivals. Cincinnati, a historic program. You can go back to rivalry. They always play Houston tough, for whatever it's worth, right? Sure, I get that. But when you look at the home only versus the away only, and if you're new to this, the way the Big 12 is doing the 18-game schedule next year is you have home and home with 3 schools, and then the other 12 games you play half the conference at home and half the conference on the road. That way you get to see everyone at least once in your schedule. If you look at this, Houston got screwed simply in the way the quad system ranks or the net system ranks games. I thought initially by a lot because of how many quad one games they would have, right? And so what I did was I used last year's rankings in the net ranking, which is an analytical. It's a model to see, how tough a team is or whatever, used in your quad one wins, your quad two wins, your quad three wins, etc. Quad one is if you beat a game against a top 30 team at home, top 75 team in the net on the road. A quad two game is 31 to 75 at home or 76 to 135 on the road. And what's interesting about that is, look, some of these schools like Texas Tech, it's a quad one game wherever you play it. They're really good, right? Baylor, interestingly enough, came kind of at that edge where at 30th, they were a quad one game wherever you play it. Perfect. But when I looked at these other games, the home and road games, immediately my thought was, well, suddenly games like Colorado at home is going to be a quad three game based on last year. Whereas if it had been a road game, it would be a quad two game. And that would actually help Houston's potential seeding, right? Because when they see things, part of your resume, a big part of your resume, is your series of quad one wins, quad 1-2 record, etc. Right? You obviously want to be undefeated, be perfect. Being undefeated in quad 3 and 4 is almost a requirement to get one seed, and all of that, right? Not that getting a one seed is the end all be all, but it certainly helps in terms of your path theoretically. And when I went through last year and looked at the schedule, and based on last year's net rankings, in the current setup, Arizona finished 12th in the net. So that would be a quad one game at home. Arizona State finished 74th in the net. That's a quad two game, barely. Colorado's 86th. That'd be a quad three game. Kansas State 75th, quad two game, barely. West Virginia 51st, quad two game, barely. Central Florida 71st, quad two game, barely. Your road games, your heavy hitters here, BYU, 24th, quad one game. Iowa State, 9th, quad one game. Kansas, 20th, quad one game. Oklahoma State, 96th a year ago in the net. That's a quad two road game. TCU, 78th in the net a year ago. That's a quad two road game. Utah, 73rd, actually makes them a quad one road game based on last year's net. So based on last year net rankings, their current matrix offers them 10 quad one games in conference, 7 quad two games, and 1 quad three game. But I was like, Kansas and Iowa State and BYU, those would be quad one games at home. Central Florida, Kansas State, you could flip those quad two games into quad one games if you just flipped it. So I went through and looked, and if you just directly flip this, home and your home games on the road, BYU would obviously still be a quad one game because they're 24th. Iowa State, 9th, still a quad one game. Kansas, 20th, still a quad one game. Those three schools being in the top 30 means they're a quad one game. Oklahoma State would actually become a quad three game because they were so far back last year at 96th. TCU would become a quad three game because they were just on the wrong side of that line. Utah would become a quad two game. Now, I know what you're saying. You're like, Parker, that got worse. I get it. But listen how much better or more challenging in terms of the eyes of the committee your home games having been played on the road would be. Arizona at 12th would be a quad one road game. Arizona State at 74th would be a quad one road game. Colorado at 86th would be a quad two road game. Kansas State at 75th would be a quad one road game. West Virginia at 51st would be a quad one road game. Central Florida at 71st would be a quad one road game. If you just flipped the schedule, home and away, obviously the home and home would stay the same, but if you just flipped it, you'd have 13 quad one games in conference based on last year's net rating and 3 quad two games in conference based on last year's net rating, right? Now, admittedly, you would be adding a second quad three game. Now, obviously, the biggest thing here is to win the games. Yeah, I'm not an idiot. I get it. That's the biggest part of this. But if you look at last year's net, and I want to talk about that at the end here about why that might not matter anyway. Um, you do gain quad one opportunities by just flipping home one away by 3. And I know that that's not the end all be all. I know they have some great games against Arkansas and Florida State and Tennessee and all these non conference games as well. I understand that those may carry more weight than that fringe game against a TCU or whatever. I do think, though, that it's odd, and perhaps it's just as simple as unfortunate, that Houston comes in, runs this conference in 2 years, and ain't nobody close, and then gets handed this schedule. You would think that the conference itself would want to give their belle of the ball, their show cow, their the pride and joy as quickly as Houston's become that, the most quad one opportunities to make sure that a Big 12 team had a shot at being a number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament. I don't think that's outlandish, and I don't think it's crazy to think the Big 12 should want to do that for Houston, right? Now, with that said, if they won 10 quad one games in conference, if they won, let's say, 3 quad one games outside of conference, and then they won other quad, that they lost 1 quad 2 game, yeah, they'd be fine. I get it. However, I do think that it's interesting that it didn't take any crazy finagling. It just took a flipping. And look, last year's net was last year's net. I think West Virginia got a better coach now than they did that. That's kind of one of the reasons I'm tired of Paul talking about Tucker DeVries and all that stuff is I think they're better off for it. Hodges is a good coach, right? Oklahoma State and their rebuild may be better. TCU and Utah and Kansas State were all kind of on that border. Who flips the script on what side of the border they're on this year could be totally lucky. Who knows, right? So I get that some of these last year's net does not matter and all that and the flip into this and what have you. Sure. I also get that winning the games is very important. I just feel like if Houston had Kansas or Kentucky or Tar Heels or whatever across their chest, they don't actually say Tar Heels on the chest, I guess it's North Carolina. But anyway, I do think that they'd have gotten the deference and had a chance to show themselves off with a built-in resume that would have given you an opportunity to make a really, really compelling case for a number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, none of them managed to win the games. Obviously, I think he's going to win most of these games anyway. I'm pretty confident in the roster that they've got. Tell me in the comments down below what you think. That was my third segment thought experiment. If you got an idea for one or a take to fire off, send it to locoogspod@gmail.com or comment down below on YouTube as well. Thank you for tuning in today and making us your first listen of the day each and every day. As an everydayer that you are, Locked On Coogs, prime member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.